Hello and welcome back to the US history through Dutch eyes. My name is Johan and I'm a Dutch citizen, and as a Dutchman or a European, I wonder, why is there such a big gap in the understanding how Europe and the United States understand each other? What is missing? I guess what is missing between in the teachings that we have in Europe and United States that maybe explains where this gap comes from. And to do so, I dive into the American history, and today I go with the second part of the 13 colonies, and the second part is the 13 colonies from 1700 to 1750. And again, the channel is Jeffrey the Librarian. I already subscribed yesterday and I will like this one again, and then we will start this journey. Let's go.
The following presentation outlines the maturation of the colonies in North America during the first half of the 18th century.
Yeah, this one was of yesterday. Santa Fe, El Paso, St. Augustine were Spanish. Arkansas Post, the Pierre Saint Ignace, Quebec, Montreal, Fort Frontenac, and Port Royal. The names already suggested it. It's French. Then we have Albany, New Haven, Philadelphia, Fort Christina, St. Mary's, Boston, with Harvard. It's right there. Harvard, and Plymouth, New York, Williamsburg, and Charlestown were the English ones, the Great Britain ones. And we started with my favorite, of course, New York, that once was New Amsterdam, but we have to relinquish it to the British during the Dutch Anglo War. So, yeah, this is where we are at 1700. So let's see how this continues.
This map shows North America in the year 1700. English settlements, which we will define as British after 1707, are in red. French settlements are in blue, and Spanish settlements are in yellow. The English monarch and the date are shown in the bottom right corner. In the year 1700, King William III is on the throne. His wife, Mary II, with whom he had jointly reigned, had passed in 1694. The husband and wife joint monarchy is the namesake of William and Mary University in Williamsburg, Virginia, which was founded in 1693. In the year 1700, England and France have been active in North America.
If you look at this, France had a larger part of the United States than the British have, but only because of the Arkansas Post along the the Mississippi River. So in fact, they are only up there in nowadays Canada, with one exception, the Arkansas Post down the Mississippi River.
For about 100 years, and Spain has been active in North America for 2 centuries. At the dawn of the 18th century,
So Spain was already there, and we all came from Europe. You all came from Europe. So who is an alien in the United States?
there are some 251,000 people living in the English colonies. Let's shift the map westward. In the year 1700, the Spanish Jesuit father Eusebio Kino establishes a mission at San Javier del Bac in modern Tucson, Arizona. The Tohono O'odham Nation is in this area. We will slide the map back to the east. 1701, Yale is founded in Connecticut. There are now 3 colleges in the future United States at the dawn of the 18th century: Harvard in Massachusetts, William and Mary in Virginia, and Yale in Connecticut.
3 major universities already in the year of 1701. 3 major and still world-renowned universities.
Also in 1701, the French explorer Cadillac establishes Fort Detroit. This post provides further French access into the Huron lands of Canada, as well as the Ottawa of Michigan and the Miami in northern Ohio. These French forts serve as trading posts with the local native nations. These fur trading posts receive beaver pelts from the natives, and in return, the French give metal pots, tools, and muskets to the natives. The French will successfully integrate with native communities. The Jesuits become skilled in Algonquian and Iroquois languages. 1702, the Protestant majority in Maryland establishes the Church of England as the official church in the colony, which essentially overturns the colony's original intent as a haven for Catholics. Nevertheless, Maryland will remain religiously diverse. In 1704, the Boston Newsletter begins publication, the first continuous regular newspaper in the future United States. New England's tradition of literacy derived from
The Boston newspaper. Is it still there? I don't know. One of the first, but is it still around in Boston or in the United States?
its Puritan past has produced a culture of writing, recording, and as we will see, scientific ingenuity. Also in 1704, the French and Abenaki, in response to attacks on the natives in the Northeast, strike Deerfield, Massachusetts. Dozens are killed. Massachusetts retaliates unsuccessfully against the French at Port Royal in Acadia, Canada. This series of battles is called Queen Anne's War, one of multiple struggles between England and France for North America in the 18th century.
Yeah, and we did also our part. The English had a lot of fights with the Dutch too, so it's sometimes we were with the French, sometimes we were with the Brits.
An interesting difference between France and England at this time is that the French have adopted the Gregorian or New Style calendar, while England was still on the Julian or Old Style calendar. The two nations thus used calendars that were 11 days different from each other. And you may see dates that specify Old Style or New Style for this period, referring to the calendar system that is being utilized.
Yeah, keep on going, because I'm thinking it's still July the 14th, 1704, or July the 25th, 1704. Why not? I'm curious about it. Why not, like everything else, small, bigger, biggest? 14th July 1704, 25th July 1704. Why July the 14th? Or why July the 25th? It's not logical.
Let's zoom out. 1707. Across the Atlantic Ocean, the Act of Union united England and Scotland into Great Britain. Thus, from this point forward, we will refer to the English-speaking colonies as the British colonies, as opposed to the English colonies, as the term British.
After a major war. That's why the British and the Scottish came together. But they had a great war before this was over.
British includes both England and Scotland. 1708. Due to Charleston, South Carolina's heavy importation of slave labor, South Carolina has a majority African population. Within slave quarters, African architecture, cooking, and even fishing techniques will be present in South Carolina. Let's zoom back into the colonies. In 1710, French Port Royal falls to the British during clashes in Queen Anne's War. The British renamed Port Royal Annapolis Royal. The 18th century will see ever-increasing clashes between France and Britain for possession of the continent. Both Annapolis Royal in Nova Scotia, Canada, and Annapolis, Maryland, which had received a charter in 1708, were both named for Queen Anne. In 1711, expanding British encroachment into native lands in North Carolina leads to the
What is with the audio? North Carolina? What?
Tuscarora War. Also in 1711, the French established a new fort at Mobile, Alabama, just west of Spanish Florida. The Choctaw, Appalachian, and Creek nations are in this region. In 1713, Queen Anne's War comes to an end. At the Treaty of Utrecht, the
Treaty of Utrecht? Yeah. The Treaty of Utrecht, the Netherlands. Treaty of Utrecht. Nice.
French are required to cede the region of Acadia with captured Port Royal, which is now British Annapolis Royal, to Britain. French Acadia becomes British Nova Scotia. However, Cape Breton Island remains in French possession, which will play a critical role later in the century.
And still is French.
Zooming out, we can see that Hudson Bay and Newfoundland are also given over from France to Britain in 1713 as a consequence of the Treaty of Utrecht, which closed this round of British and French conflict over North America. Also in 1713, but across the Atlantic, the play Cato, a Tragedy by English writer Joseph Addison is performed at Theatre Royal, Drury Lane in London. This very popular play was based on the ancient Roman senator Cato, a defender of the Roman Republic against Julius Caesar. The play contains important discussions of liberty and freedom, including a line that invokes liberty or death. Across the Atlantic, a great admirer of Joseph Addison's writings is a youth in Boston named Benjamin Franklin. We will zoom back into North America. Meanwhile, the French expansion continues down the Mississippi River in the region known as Louisiana, named after King Louis of France. French Louisiana in the 18th century spreads up the Mississippi River and into her tributaries, not to be confused with the borders of the modern state of Louisiana.
I wonder what did happen with all this, because if you're looking at this part of your history, you would say, why are the Americans not French language orientated, and that the British gain all the advantage in English? Because if you look at this, you would say, okay, French could be the major language from the United States. So what happened there?
Not to be confused with the borders of the modern state of Louisiana. 1715. The French built Fort Michilimackinac, or Mackinac for short, situated at the junction of Lake Michigan and Lake Huron, a strategic position within the Great Lakes region. Michilimackinac might also be shortened to Mackinac, the latter spelling used as the city's name today. The Ottawa and Ojibwa are native to this area. 1716. The French build Fort Rosalie in modern Natchez, Mississippi. Here in the lower Mississippi River Territory, the French are interacting with Natchez and Choctaw nations, among others. Also in 1716, the first theater in America is established at Williamsburg, Virginia, by Charles and Mary Stagg. In 1717, the French established Fort Toulouse near present-day Montgomery, Alabama.
More French.
Fort Toulouse serves multiple functions, providing an outpost in East Louisiana, keeping British expansion in check, and developing alliances with the regional native nations. Multiple functions, providing an outpost in East Louisiana,
keep the British in check,
keeping British expansion in check, and developing alliances with the regional native nations.
So, like I said earlier, why are the United States not French?
The Creek Confederacy is local to this area, One of the Creek nations is the Alabama people, the namesake of the state of Alabama. 1718, the French found New Orleans. The French presence in the lower Mississippi region adopts a tobacco plantation economy with slave labor, very different than the French presence in the fur-trading North. With New Orleans established near the mouth of the Mississippi River, the French have an intercontinental water empire that extends from Canada through the Great Lakes and down the Mississippi River to the Caribbean. While this area is incredibly huge, the number of Frenchmen in North America can be measured in the tens of thousands, a very light population
Low French, high British. Okay.
density that likely represented a limited threat to the natives and helped aid in promoting friendly relations between the French and many of the native nations. In comparison, there are hundreds of thousands of British colonists on the Atlantic coast at this time, which was likely perceived as more threatening to the native nations.
Hundreds of thousands. Wow.
Also in 1718, the Spanish found the mission San Antonio in modern Texas, and the mission will later take on the name Alamo, meaning cottonwood in Spanish. In 1720, there are some 466,000 people in the British colonies, almost double the number from a generation before in the year 1700. 1721, smallpox erupts in Boston. However, the Puritan minister Cotton Mather encourages Dr. Zebdiel Boylston to inoculate the population using a method developed in Turkey. Mather himself had heard of this technique from his West African slave Onesimus. Boylston, against the advice of other doctors, successfully inoculates hundreds from smallpox in Boston. Also in Boston in 1721, James Franklin founds a weekly newspaper, the New England Courant. Franklin's younger brother, Benjamin, serves as his teenage apprentice. 1722, the French improved their reach into the Algonquian Midwest, building Fort Miami at modern Fort Wayne, Indiana. As the name implies, the Miami Nation is local to this area. Also in 1722,
A lot of different Native Americans, Indians, were there. A lot of different tribe names.
the Tuscarora in North Carolina, following years of struggle against British colonists, migrate northward to join their brothers and sisters in the Iroquois Confederacy in modern New York State, becoming the sixth nation of the Iroquois Confederacy. 1723, the French expand their fur trading empire beyond the Mississippi River, building Fort Orleans on the Missouri River, located in modern DeWitt, Missouri. The Missouri Nation is in this area. Although Fort Orleans will be abandoned in a few years, it is claimed that this is the first European bastion on the Missouri River. 1725, the New York Gazette begins publication. In 1726, the French build Fort Niagara, securing the river as it flows into Lake Ontario. Fort Niagara is actually on the eastern side of the Niagara River in modern Youngstown, New York. 1727, the British also expand their holdings on Lake Ontario. Fort Oswego forms a trade route that chains from Lake Ontario across the Mohawk Valley and to the Hudson River, allowing goods to flow from New York City to Lake Ontario and back again. The Iroquois Confederacy in the Mohawk Valley is caught between the British in New York and the French in Canada. 1729, Baltimore is chartered in Maryland. Also in 1729, Jonathan Edwards begins preaching at a church in Northampton, Massachusetts. His enthusiastic sermons are unique and become popular in the secularizing New England that has lost much of its Puritan zeal. The Great Awakening is underway. In 1731, Benjamin Franklin, once a Bostonian but now in Philadelphia, helps to found the first subscription library in the colonies.
Benjamin Franklin. Yeah, okay. I know where this is going to.
Members pay a subscription fee to borrow books. The next year, 1732, Benjamin Franklin publishes Poor Richard's Almanac. Also in 1732, Fort Vincennes on the Wabash River in modern Indiana provides the French with trade and outreach to the Illinois Nation and other Algonquins in the western woodlands. French settlements in modern Indiana and Illinois will provide the French with the fertile lands to produce grain for their North American holdings, just as this region provides agriculture today for the United States. Georgia is chartered in 1732 by James Oglethorpe. There are now 13 British colonies in North America. Oglethorpe is a philanthropist who envisions a haven for the poor and a second chance for reformed prisoners. Oglethorpe also forbids slavery in this colony, so the British colony that was the furthest south in North America was also founded without slavery. This, of course, will change.
This looks amazing. This is a colony? Ships. So this is coastline or a harbor. And then we've got housing perfectly in blocks. A house and a garden. Each house has its own garden. Looks nice.
Was also founded without slavery. This, of course, will change after Oglethorpe's influence fades, but for a time, Georgia has no slaves. Georgia also functions as a buffer between South Carolina and Spanish Florida. In 1733, Oglethorpe founds Savannah, Georgia. And in 1735, Oglethorpe invites John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, to Georgia. 1736, students from William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia, performed the first known college play at a theater in Williamsburg. The play is Joseph Addison's Cato, and the phrase "liberty or death" is spoken on stage in Williamsburg. Let's zoom out for a wider view. 1738, Fort Rouge is built in future Winnipeg, Canada. This post is but one of multiple French forts that extend the French fur trade northwest beyond Lake Superior into the Lake Winnipeg and Lake Manitoba region. The Assiniboine, Cree, and Sioux are some of the nations local to this region. We will zoom back in. Also in 1738, the Reverend George Whitefield arrives in Savannah, and during the year he travels all the way north to Philadelphia. Whitefield would often speak in fields because his crowds were too large for church buildings. As we approach the mid-18th century, it is important to see how the diversity of American religion grew. In 1700, the landscape was dominated in the South by the Anglicans and in New England by the Puritans, who themselves are actually technically Anglicans but in a low church setting. William Penn's tolerance in Pennsylvania brought Quakers, German Mennonites, and German Lutherans into the middle colonies, and Maryland's tradition as a Catholic haven resulted in a Catholic population there. Dutch Reformed communities remained in New York from that state's Dutch heritage. However, the Great Awakening in the first half of the 1700s brings new diversity, adding the new Presbyterian
Whoa.
and Methodist communities to the spectrum, shown here in orange, with the Presbyterians and Methodists at this time sharing the kind of evangelical fervor that was exhibited in previous generations among New England's Puritans. So there's actually a large spectrum of church experience in 18th century America, ranging from the high liturgical traditions, which emphasized tradition and sacraments, such as the Catholics, Lutherans, and High Church Anglicans, across the spectrum to the evangelical, New Light, Great Awakening communities that emphasized direct communion with the divine, such as those among the Methodists, Presbyterians, Reformed, and Low Church Anglicans.
A lot of religions, and there's this both sides of the spectrum, so there's something in between too. Wow, I didn't know this. Why?
Outside the British colonies, the French and the Spanish
Well,
are Roman
Catholic.
Catholic.
Yeah. So the British brought along a lot, a variety of beliefs to the United States, while the French and the Spanish were Catholic.
1739. A major slave uprising occurs at Stono near Charleston. The Spanish in Florida were offering emancipation to fugitive slaves from the British colonies, but the uprising is nevertheless brutally stamped out. 1740. Savannah is caught in the middle of a back and forth border conflict between Spanish Florida and British South Carolina. This conflict is the uniquely named War of Jenkins' Ear, named after a sailor who lost his ear during a raid. Oglethorpe responds from Georgia, besieging St. Augustine, but the Spanish hold off the attackers. Also in 1740, George Whitefield has an orphanage built in Savannah. That year, Whitefield preached in New England, went all the way from the south to the north. A very large percentage of the British colonists in all 13 colonies are going to hear Reverend Whitefield preach. In 1740, there are some 906,000 people.
906,000.
Living in British North America, approaching 1 million people in those British colonies, almost double the figure from a generation before in 1720.
Wow. 1 million.
And almost 4 times as many as there were living in the British colonies in 1700. 1741, indigo is introduced to South Carolina, adding another cash crop to the southern plantation system. Rice and indigo are grown in South Carolina, while tobacco is grown in Virginia and in Maryland. At this early stage, North Carolina has much fewer slaves than South Carolina and Virginia. All 3 of these cash crops are grown through slave labor. It's important to note that cotton is not yet one of these cash crops. Cotton as a cash crop in the South will come generations later. Also in 1741, Jonathan Edwards in Enfield, Massachusetts, delivers his famous Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God sermon. The high emotional tone induced by these sermons is a good example of the preaching style of New Light ministers. In 1742, the Spanish in Florida counterattacked Georgia, striking near Fort Frederica south of Savannah. However, the British repulsed the Spanish at the Battle of Bloody Marsh. While the war for Jenkins' Ear is occurring in the south, another conflict begins in the north. In 1744, King George's War, spillover from Europe's War of Austrian Succession, is yet another conflict between Britain and France, with ramifications between the British colonies and French Canada. In North America, the Nova Scotia and Cape Breton Islands are at the center of King George's War. On Cape Breton Island, the French fortress is Louisbourg. 1745, New Englanders take Fortress Louisbourg on Cape Breton Island. This severely cripples France's control of the mouth of the St. Lawrence River, the northern inlet into their lake and river empire. But the British colonies suffer a setback that same year in the conflict. The French and their native allies attack Saratoga in New York, south of Lake Champlain. Dozens are killed. Also in 1745, a widow with the last name of Roberts opens a coffee house in Philadelphia, an example of the widening business opportunities for women in colonial America. 1746, Princeton, originally called the College of New Jersey, is founded, the fourth institution of higher learning in the future United States.
Princeton University. A lot of university in those days.
Princeton was a new light school founded in the fervor of the Great Awakening. In 1748, the peace terms between France and Britain following the War of Austrian Succession, also known as King George's War, are made. Britain yields Fortress Louisbourg on Cape Breton Island back to France. France's hold on Lower Canada is largely restored. New Englanders are angered that their capture of Louisbourg has been forfeited. 1749, the British establish Halifax on Nova Scotia to counter the French fortress Louisbourg on Cape Breton Island. We can see the tinderbox that is festering between Britain and France and Canada as we approach mid-century. The extent of the settlements in the 13 British colonies are shown in red here, and by 1750 these colonies are nearly 150 years old, going back to Jamestown, with the population extending to the Appalachian Mountains. And their economies have matured from the early settlements in the 17th century. In the north, timber is harvested from the...
Those were the 13 colonies, but there were many, many more. So this is only talking about the 13 colonies, the British 13 colonies. But with over or near 1 million people living there.
Great forests there. North Carolina is another source of timber. The colonial period is often called the Age of Wood, because in Europe, wood was scarce for centuries of deforestation. So a major raw material from America that goes back to Europe is wood.
Yeah, and the housing mainly are made from bricks in Europe versus wood in the United States, because we have lots of bricks or can create bricks, and the wood, yeah.
Off the coast of New England, a substantial fishing and shipping industry thrives. The middle colonies produce timber, iron, and ships. Wheat is cultivated from New England through New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and into North Carolina. Tobacco plantations exist from Maryland through Virginia and into northern North Carolina. Indigo is cultivated in the Carolinas, while rice is produced in the Carolinas and in Georgia. In the backcountry, up and down the Appalachian Mountains, British colonists on the edge of the empire are engaged with the fur trade with Native Americans. These goods and wares are traded between the colonies themselves as well as with the mother country. North America produces the raw goods like timber and furs, while Mother Britain produces finished products like textiles. Now remember, in the mercantilist system which was being enforced by the British government, you were not to be trading, if you were a British colonist, you were not to be trading with the French or with the Spanish. You had to be trading with the British.
Yeah, but the Dutch were already there. Wait out. What?
Most trade is bartering one set of goods for another. At 1750, we see a robust, populous, and economically powerful British colonial system, while France has secured the trust of Native American nations in a wide but lightly populated colonial system. Spain has been settled in Florida for almost 2 centuries, and their western missions have expanded in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. The next decade, the 1750s, will see a collision course between these civilizations, and the fate of the North American continent will be determined.
The fate of the North American continent will be determined. Sounds nice. Okay, so these were the first 13 colonies in the British United States. But there were many more. The French and the Spanish also had colonies, and so this is only focused on the 13 British. I wonder if there is anything about the other colonies and what happened there. But this is it for today. I learned a lot. If you did too, press like and subscribe, and see you guys in the next video.